The conference room at Naval Air Station Oceana buzzed with quiet conversations as military personnel filled the seats. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell sat near the back, her flight suit crisp, and her hair pulled into the regulation bun that had become second nature after 8 years of service. The morning briefing had been routine until the unexpected announcement that a Navy SEAL team would be addressing the assembled pilots. Sarah watched as Captain Jake Reynolds entered the room with the confident stride that marked every SEAL she had ever encountered. His weathered face spoke of countless missions in hostile territories, and the small scars on his hands told stories of close calls that most people would never imagine. The room fell silent as he approached the podium, his presence commanding immediate attention from the 100-plus aviators gathered for what they had assumed would be another standard operational briefing. The captain's eyes swept across the room, taking in the faces of some of the Navy's finest pilots. F-18 Hornet drivers, helicopter pilots, transport crews, and reconnaissance specialists all waited to hear what this elite warrior had to say. Sarah noticed how his gaze lingered momentarily on each section, as if he were mentally cataloging the skills and experience represented in the room. "Good morning, aviators," Captain Reynolds began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led men through the most dangerous missions imaginable. "I'm here today because my team has been tasked with an operation that's going to require some very specific skills. We need pilots who have seen real combat, who know what it's like when the enemy is shooting back, and who can keep their aircraft steady when everything around them is falling apart." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She had flown 2 combat tours in Afghanistan, where she had piloted both transport helicopters and reconnaissance aircraft through some of the most dangerous airspace in the world. Her logbook contained entries that most pilots would never see: missions flown under enemy fire, emergency extractions from hostile territory, and reconnaissance flights that had provided crucial intelligence for ground operations. The captain continued his address, explaining that his SEAL team had been assigned to conduct a high-risk operation in a region where air support would be absolutely critical. The mission would require pilots who could operate in contested airspace, who understood the unique challenges of supporting special operations forces, and who had the experience to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure. "This isn't going to be a training exercise," he emphasized, his tone growing more serious. "The intelligence reports indicate significant enemy air defenses, possible surface-to-air missile threats, and a high probability of encountering hostile aircraft. We need pilots who have been tested in real combat situations, not just in simulators or training scenarios." As he spoke, Sarah reflected on her own experiences in Afghanistan. She remembered the mission where her helicopter had taken small arms fire while extracting wounded soldiers from a remote outpost. The aircraft had shuddered under the impact of enemy rounds, but she had maintained control and completed the evacuation successfully. There had been the reconnaissance flight, where she had to navigate through a thunderstorm, while enemy fighters searched for her aircraft below the cloud cover. Each mission had taught her something new about flying under pressure, about making decisions when lives hung in the balance. The captain paused in his briefing, his eyes once again scanning the assembled pilots. Sarah could sense the tension in the room as everyone wondered who among them might be selected for this mysterious and clearly dangerous mission. Some of the younger pilots shifted nervously in their seats, while the veterans maintained the stoic expressions that came with years of military service. "The operation will involve multiple phases," Captain Reynolds continued. "We'll need close air support during the initial insertion, reconnaissance flights to monitor enemy movement, and extraction capabilities for multiple scenarios, including emergency evacuation under fire. The pilots we select will be working directly with my team, which means they'll need to understand special operations procedures and be able to adapt quickly to changing mission parameters." Sarah had worked with special operations forces before during her tours in Afghanistan. She understood their methods, their communication protocols, and their need for absolute reliability from their air support. She had learned to read the subtle signals that indicated when a mission was about to go sideways, and she had developed the ability to anticipate what the ground forces would need before they even requested it. The briefing continued with technical details about the operational area, potential threats, and the specific aircraft types that would be required. Sarah noted that the mission would involve both fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters, requiring pilots who were qualified on multiple platforms. Her training records showed certifications on 4 different aircraft types, including both the AH-64 Apache attack helicopter and the F-18E Super Hornet fighter. As Captain Reynolds spoke about the timeline for the operation, Sarah considered whether she should volunteer. The mission sounded extremely dangerous, with a high probability of encountering enemy resistance. At the same time, it represented exactly the kind of challenge that had drawn her to military aviation in the first place. She had not joined the Navy to fly safe missions in peaceful skies. She had enlisted because she wanted to serve her country in the most demanding and important operations. The captain's voice brought her attention back to the briefing. This mission will require pilots who can operate independently, who can make critical decisions without waiting for authorization from higher command, and who have the combat experience to know when to take calculated risks. We can't afford to have anyone on this team who hasn't been tested under fire. Sarah thought about the night mission in Afghanistan when her helicopter had been forced to land in hostile territory due to mechanical problems. She had coordinated with ground forces to establish a defensive perimeter while her crew chief worked to repair the aircraft. Enemy forces had probed their position throughout the night, but she had managed the situation calmly, directing defensive fire and maintaining communication with higher command until rescue forces arrived at dawn. The captain concluded his initial briefing and announced that he would be conducting individual interviews with pilots who met the basic qualifications. The requirements included a minimum of 2 combat deployments, experience with close air support missions, and current qualifications on at least 2 different aircraft platforms. Sarah easily met all the criteria, but she knew that many other pilots in the room had similar qualifications. As the formal briefing ended and pilots began to file out of the conference room, Sarah remained in her seat, thinking about the decision she was about to make. The mission would likely take her away from her current squadron for several months, and there was no guarantee that she would return safely. On the other hand, this represented an opportunity to serve at the highest level of military operations, working with some of the most elite forces in the American military. She watched Captain Reynolds gathering his materials at the front of the room, noting how several senior pilots approached him to express their interest in the mission. These were experienced aviators with distinguished service records, men who had flown combat missions for decades and had earned the respect of their peers through their skill and dedication. Sarah stood up slowly, straightening her flight suit and checking her appearance in the reflection of the conference room window. She had always been one of the few women in her squadrons, and she had learned early in her career that she would need to prove herself repeatedly in ways that her male colleagues never had to consider. But she had also learned that her gender could be an advantage in certain situations, allowing her to approach problems from perspectives that others might not consider. The captain was now alone at the front of the room, organizing his papers and preparing for the individual interviews. Sarah took a deep breath and began walking toward the front of the room, her footsteps echoing slightly in the now empty space. She had made her decision, and she was ready to volunteer for whatever dangerous mission lay ahead. Captain Reynolds looked up as Sarah approached, his experienced eyes quickly assessing her bearing and confidence. He had spent enough time around military personnel to read the subtle signs that distinguished exceptional soldiers from merely competent ones, and something in Sarah's steady approach suggested she was not intimidated by the prospect of a dangerous mission. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said, reading the name tape on her flight suit. "I take it you're interested in learning more about this operation?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, maintaining eye contact in the direct manner that had become natural to her through years of military training. "I believe my experience qualifies me for the mission you've described, and I'd like to volunteer for consideration." The captain gestured toward a chair near his position at the front of the room. As Sarah sat down, he pulled out a tablet and began reviewing what she assumed was her service record. She watched his expression carefully as he read through her combat deployments, flight certifications, and performance evaluations. "Afghanistan, 2018 and 2020, he noted aloud. "Multiple aircraft qualifications. Commendation for actions under fire during a medical evacuation." He looked up at her with increased interest. "Tell me about that evacuation mission." Sarah had expected this question and had mentally rehearsed her response during the walk to the front of the room. "It was a routine medical evacuation that became complicated when we reached the landing zone. Intelligence had missed an enemy position about 200 meters from the pickup point. As soon as we began our approach, we started taking automatic weapons fire from at least 3 different positions. She paused, remembering the adrenaline surge she had felt when the first tracer round streaked past her aircraft. The wounded soldier was critical, so returning to base wasn't an option. I coordinated with the ground forces to provide suppressing fire while I brought the helicopter down in a hot landing zone. We took several hits to the aircraft, but the crew chief was able to get the casualty loaded while our door gunner laid down covering fire. Captain Reynolds nodded approvingly. "How did you get out of there?" "I used the terrain to mask our departure," Sarah continued. "There was a ridge line, about half a mile to the east, that provided cover from the enemy positions. I flew nap of the earth to reach the ridge, then climbed rapidly once we had terrain masking. The aircraft was damaged, but all systems remained functional enough to reach the forward surgical unit." The captain made notes on his tablet as she spoke, occasionally asking clarifying questions about her decision-making process during the mission. Sarah could tell that he was evaluating not just her technical skills as a pilot, but her ability to think clearly under extreme pressure, and her willingness to accept calculated risks when the mission demanded it. "You've also got time in the Super Hornet," he observed, continuing through her record. "Fixed-wing combat experience?" "Yes, sir. I flew reconnaissance missions and provided close air support for ground operations. The reconnaissance flights were mostly intelligence gathering, but the close air support missions involved direct engagement with enemy positions." She described several missions where she had used precision-guided munitions to eliminate threats to American forces, emphasizing her experience with the complex coordination required between air and ground units. Captain Reynolds spent the next 30 minutes reviewing her qualifications in detail, asking technical questions about aircraft systems, weapons employment, and emergency procedures. Sarah answered each question confidently, drawing on years of training and real-world experience to demonstrate her competence across multiple areas of military aviation. "The mission we're planning," the captain said finally, "will involve operating in an area where we have limited intelligence about enemy capabilities. We know they have surface-to-air missiles, but we don't know exactly what types or how many. We know they have aircraft, but we don't know their current operational status. You'll be flying into a situation where the threat picture could change rapidly and dramatically." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That's not unlike Afghanistan in the early days of my first deployment. Intelligence was often incomplete or outdated, and we had to adapt our tactics based on what we encountered in real time." "Exactly," Captain Reynolds agreed. "The difference is that this operation has strategic implications that go well beyond the tactical level. Success or failure could affect American interests across an entire region. The pressure will be intense, and there won't be room for mistakes." He described the operational concept in general terms, explaining that the SEAL team would be conducting a multi-phase mission requiring different types of air support at various stages. The initial insertion would need to be conducted covertly, requiring pilots who could navigate complex terrain at night using night vision equipment. The subsequent phases might require everything from close air support to emergency extraction under fire. "How do you handle stress?" the captain asked suddenly, changing the direction of the conversation. "I'm not talking about the normal stress of flying combat missions. I'm talking about the kind of stress that comes when everything that can go wrong does go wrong, and you're the only thing standing between your team and disaster." Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I've found that training and experience are the best preparation for high-stress situations. When things start going wrong, I fall back on my training and focus on the immediate problem in front of me. I try not to think about all the things that could happen. I just concentrate on what I can control in the present moment." She described a mission in Afghanistan where her aircraft had suffered multiple system failures while conducting a reconnaissance flight in contested airspace. Rather than becoming overwhelmed by the accumulating problems, she had prioritized the failures based on immediate safety concerns and had worked through them systematically while navigating to a safe landing area. "The key," she explained, "was not trying to solve everything at once. I dealt with the most critical issues first, then worked my way through the other problems as time and circumstances allowed. The aircraft was barely flyable by the time I reached base, But we completed the mission, and everyone went home safely. Captain Reynolds seemed satisfied with her response and moved on to questions about her ability to work with Special Operations Forces. Sarah described her previous experiences with Army Rangers and Marine Special Operations units, emphasizing her understanding of their unique requirements and her ability to provide exactly the type of support they needed when they needed it. Special Operations Forces operate differently from conventional units, she explained. They need air support that can adapt quickly to changing situations. And they need pilots who understand their methods and can anticipate their needs. I've learned to read the subtle cues in radio communications that tell me when a ground team is in trouble, even if they can't explicitly say so. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, with Captain Reynolds asking increasingly specific questions about her technical knowledge and tactical judgment. Sarah could tell that he was impressed with her qualifications, but she also sensed that he was still evaluating whether she had the particular combination of skills and temperament that this mission would require. Finally, the captain leaned back in his chair and looked at her directly. "Lieutenant, I'm going to be honest with you. This mission is going to be extremely dangerous. The intelligence estimates suggest a significant probability of casualties, and we won't have the usual backup and support resources that you're accustomed to in Afghanistan. If something goes wrong, you'll be largely on your own until we can organize a rescue operation." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I understand the risks, sir. I didn't volunteer for this because I thought it would be easy or safe. I volunteered because this is the kind of mission that makes a difference, and I want to be part of operations that matter." The captain nodded approvingly. "I have a few more pilots to interview, but I can tell you that you're definitely being considered for the team. I'll have a decision by tomorrow morning. If you're selected, you'll need to report to a classified facility for additional briefings and specialized training." As Sarah stood to leave, Captain Reynolds added one final comment. "Lieutenant, I want you to know that gender isn't a factor in this selection process. I'm looking for the best pilots available, regardless of any other considerations. Your record speaks for itself. And if you're chosen for this mission, it will be because you're qualified, not because we need to fill some kind of quota." Sarah appreciated his directness. "Thank you for the opportunity, sir. I look forward to hearing from you tomorrow." She walked out of the conference room with mixed feelings of excitement and apprehension. The mission sounded exactly like the kind of challenge she had been seeking throughout her military career, but she was also realistic about the dangers involved. As she made her way back to her squadron's ready room, she began mentally preparing for the possibility that she might soon be embarking on the most dangerous mission of her career. The call came at 0600 the next morning. Sarah had been awake for 20 minutes, going through her usual pre-dawn routine of physical training and mental preparation for the day ahead, when her secure phone rang with Captain Reynolds' distinctive voice on the other end. She felt her heart rate increase despite her efforts to remain calm. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you've been selected for the operation. Report to Building 447 at 0800 for your first classified briefing. Bring your gear and prepare for an extended deployment." The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah packed her personal equipment, arranged for coverage of her regular duties, and made her way to the unmarked building that housed the Special Operations Planning Cell. When she arrived, she found herself joining a team of 12 other military personnel, including 5 other pilots, 3 SEAL team members, 2 intelligence specialists, and a communications expert. Captain Reynolds introduced the team members, and Sarah was pleased to discover that she knew 2 of the other pilots from previous deployments. Lieutenant Commander Mark Stevens had been her flight lead during several missions in Afghanistan, and Major Lisa Chen had served as a forward air controller before transitioning to pilot training. The presence of familiar faces helped ease some of the tension she felt about joining such an elite group. The briefing room was equipped with multiple large displays, showing satellite imagery, terrain maps, and intelligence assessments. As the team settled into their seats, Captain Reynolds began explaining the mission in detail for the first time. The operation, designated Neptune's Trident, would involve infiltrating a hostile region to neutralize a high-value target who posed a significant threat to American interests. The target is a terrorist leader who has been coordinating attacks against American forces and allies across the region, the captain explained. He's currently hiding in a compound located in extremely difficult terrain, surrounded by loyal fighters and protected by sophisticated air defense systems. The satellite imagery showed a remote mountain compound accessible only by narrow roads that wound through treacherous terrain. The intelligence assessment indicated that the target maintained a force of approximately 50 fighters, equipped with automatic weapons, rocket-propelled grenades, and at least 3 surface-to-air missile systems. The nearest friendly forces were more than 200 miles away, which meant that the assault team would be operating without immediate backup or support. The mission will be conducted in 3 phases, Captain Reynolds continued. Phase 1 involves covert insertion of the SEAL team during a new moon period, when natural light will be minimal. Phase 2 is the assault on the compound itself. Phase 3 is extraction of the team and any intelligence materials we can recover. Sarah studied the mission timeline carefully, noting the critical points where air support would be essential. The initial insertion would require helicopter pilots capable of flying at extremely low altitudes in mountainous terrain using only night vision equipment. The assault phase might require close air support if the ground team encountered heavier resistance than expected. The extraction phase would be the most dangerous, as enemy forces throughout the region would be alerted and responding to the operation. Major Chen raised her hand to ask about the enemy air threat. The intelligence specialist, a Navy commander named Patricia Walsh, pulled up additional imagery showing an airfield approximately 30 miles from the target compound. We've identified at least 6 enemy aircraft at this location, including 4 fighters and 2 attack helicopters. We don't have current intelligence on their operational status, but we have to assume that at least some of them are capable of responding to our operation. This information significantly complicated the mission planning. Sarah realized that the air support element would need to be prepared for potential air-to-air combat, in addition to their primary mission of supporting the ground assault. She made mental notes about weapons loading and fuel requirements, understanding that every decision would involve trade-offs between different capabilities. The briefing continued with detailed analysis of the terrain, weather patterns, and enemy communication systems. Sarah was impressed by the thoroughness of the intelligence preparation, but she also recognized the limitations of satellite imagery and signals intercepts. There would inevitably be surprises during the actual operation, and the team would need to be prepared to adapt their plans based on real-time developments. Captain Reynolds announced that the team would spend the next 2 weeks conducting intensive training at a classified facility in Nevada. The training would include night flying exercises in similar terrain, live fire practice with the specific weapon systems they would be using, and rehearsals of the actual mission using detailed mock-ups of the target compound. This training is going to push all of you to your limits, the captain warned. We're going to simulate every possible complication and emergency scenario. By the time we're finished, you'll be able to execute this mission in your sleep. The team was dismissed to make final preparations for deployment to the training facility. As Sarah gathered her materials, she was approached by Lieutenant Commander Stevens, who had been unusually quiet during the briefing. "Sarah, I need to ask you something," he said, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard. "Are you completely sure about this mission? I've been doing special operations support for 8 years, and I've never seen intelligence estimates that indicated this level of risk. The casualty projections are significant." And of then, Sarah appreciated his concern, but she had already considered the risks carefully. "Mark, I know it's dangerous, but look at what this target has been responsible for." The intelligence briefing mentioned at least 40 American deaths that can be directly attributed to operations he's coordinated. "How many more people will die if we don't stop him?" Stevens nodded thoughtfully. "You're right, of course. I just wanted to make sure you understood what we're getting into. This isn't going to be like Afghanistan, where we had extensive support infrastructure and multiple backup plans. If something goes wrong on this mission, we're going to be on our own for a long time." The conversation was interrupted by Captain Reynolds, who called for one final team meeting before dismissal. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to emphasize one point before we begin training. This mission has been classified at the highest levels because of its potential impact on regional stability. The success or failure of this operation could influence American foreign policy for years to come. He looked directly at each team member as he spoke. You were selected for this mission because you represent the best capabilities that American Special Operations Forces can provide. You have the training, the experience, and the judgment necessary to succeed in this environment. But success will require absolute commitment from every member of this team. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders as the captain continued his remarks. She had participated in important missions before, but nothing that carried such broad strategic implications. The realization that her actions during the next several weeks could affect the course of American foreign policy was both thrilling and sobering. The team was provided with detailed packing lists and security instructions for the training deployment. Sarah spent the rest of the day organizing her equipment and reviewing the technical manuals for the aircraft systems she would be using during the mission. She also took time to call her family, though she was limited to general statements about being selected for a training exercise that would keep her away from home for several weeks. That evening, as she packed her flight gear and personal items, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. She had enlisted in the Navy 12 years earlier with dreams of becoming a pilot, but she had never imagined that her career would lead to participation in such high-stakes special operations. The scared young woman who had reported to flight training a decade earlier had been transformed by years of demanding service into a confident and capable military aviator. She thought about the risks she would be facing in the coming weeks, but she also thought about the opportunity to serve her country at the highest level of military operations. This was exactly the kind of mission she had hoped for when she decided to make the military her career, and she was determined to prove herself worthy of the trust that Captain Reynolds and his superiors had placed in her. As she finished her preparations and tried to get some sleep before the early morning flight to Nevada, Sarah felt a sense of anticipation that she had not experienced since her first combat deployment. She was about to embark on the most challenging and dangerous mission of her career, but she was also about to have the opportunity to make a difference in ways that few people ever could. Whatever happened in the coming weeks, she was ready to give everything she had to ensure the mission's success.